What if the person you tried to break was the one who could shatter your entire world with a single phone call? In a crowded airport terminal, a gate agent drunk on her little bit of power decides to humiliate a black woman, mocking her clothes, her ticket, and her very presence in the first-class line. She smirks as she tears up the woman's boarding pass, telling her she doesn't belong. But what she doesn't know is that the woman she's publicly shaming, Imani Jackson, isn't just another passenger. She just became the new majority owner of the entire airline. The air in Terminal 4 of JFK International was a familiar cocktail of anxiety-stale coffee and the faint, citrusy scent of industrial cleaner. It was a symphony of chaos conducted by the relentless rhythm of rolling suitcases and garbled announcements over the PA system. For most, it was a place of transition, a necessary purgatory between where you were and where you wanted to be. For Imani Jackson, it was supposed to be a moment of quiet triumph. Just 3 hours earlier, she had closed the single biggest deal of her life. At 34, after a decade of grinding in the brutal world of venture capital, of being underestimated, overlooked, and consistently having to be twice as good to get half as much, she had done it. Her firm Nexus Capital had successfully acquired a controlling stake in AuraJet Airlines, a carrier struggling under the weight of mismanagement and teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. It was a bold, risky move her partners had balked at, but Immani saw potential where others saw ruin. She saw a foundation that could be rebuilt, a brand that could be revitalized. She saw a legacy. Now standing in the priority boarding lane for AuraJet Flight 722 to San Francisco, she was anonymous. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in comfortable charcoal grey joggers, a simple white t-shirt, and a well-worn denim jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant puff, and on her face was not the fierce negotiator who'd just conquered a boardroom, but a woman looking forward to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep on a plane before the real work began. She had deliberately booked the flight under her personal name, wanting one last experience as a regular passenger before she became the person responsible for millions of them. The line was moving in sluggish fits and starts. Ahead, the gate agent, a woman with a brassy blonde beehive that seemed to defy gravity and a name tag that read Brenda, was holding court. She wasn't just checking boarding passes, she was performing. Every interaction was a micro-drama with her in the starring role. She barked at a young man for having his music too loud, sneered at a non-native English speaker, struggling to understand her rapid-fire instructions, and loudly complained about her shift to a weary-looking colleague. Brenda was the queen of this tiny fiefdom, and her throne was the gate counter. Immani watched with a growing sense of unease. This was the front line of her new company. This was the first point of contact, the face of the brand, and it was a face twisted into a permanent scowl of disdain. The culture of a company she knew flowed from the top down, but it was felt most acutely at the bottom. What she was witnessing was a symptom of a much deeper disease, a culture of contempt for the very customers who paid their salaries. When it was Imani's turn, she stepped forward and offered a small, polite smile. "Good afternoon," she said, holding out her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed. Brenda didn't look up. Her eyes, caked in a thick layer of frosty blue eyeshadow, were fixed on her computer screen. She held out a manicured hand, her long coral pink nails tapping impatiently in the air. "Phone," she commanded the word, sharp and clipped. Immani placed her phone in Brenda's hand. Brenda glanced at the screen, her lip curling slightly. "Imani Jackson, Zone 1. She squinted at the screen, then let her gaze travel slowly, deliberately over Imani's attire. She looked from the comfortable joggers to the simple t-shirt lingering for a moment on her worn-in sneakers. The judgment was palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud. "You're in the first-class line," Brenda stated not as a question, but as an accusation. "Yes, that's correct," Imani replied, her voice even. "Seat 2A. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She scanned the boarding pass again, as if looking for a forgery. She huffed a small, theatrical sound of disbelief. "Funny," she said, her voice loud enough for the people in the line behind Imani to hear. "You don't look like a first-class passenger." A ripple of uncomfortable silence moved through the queue. People shifted their weight, their eyes darting between the two women. Imani felt a hot flush of anger, but she pushed it down, replacing it with an icy calm. This was a test. She hadn't known she'd be taking one today, but here it was. "And what exactly?" Imani asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Does a first-class passenger look like?" Brenda seemed to relish the confrontation. This was her stage. "Well, for starters," she began, leaning forward, conspiratorially, her voice dripping with condescension. "They usually have clothes that aren't from a clearance rack, and they certainly don't look like they've just rolled out of bed to catch a bus." The insult hung in the air, ugly and exposed. Imani could feel the stares of the other passengers, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and for a few veiled amusement. Her anonymity, which she had cherished just moments before, now felt like a liability. To them, she wasn't a CEO. She was just a black woman in sweatpants being berated by a gate agent. "My clothes are comfortable for a long flight," Imani said, her jaw tight. "And my ticket was paid for with my money. All you need to do is scan it." Brenda let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, I'm sure it was paid for. The question is, whose money was it?" She winked at a man in a business suit standing behind Imani, who offered a weak, sycophantic smile in return. "Maybe you got a sugar daddy, huh? Or maybe you used one of those stolen credit cards we hear so much about." The accusation was so vile, so steeped in prejudice, that Imani was momentarily stunned into silence. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was a naked display of bigotry. Brenda was using her uniform as a shield and her position as a weapon. "That is a serious and baseless accusation," Imani said, her voice now hard as steel. "I demand to speak to your supervisor, now." "My supervisor?" Brenda scoffed, picking up Imani's phone and holding it as if it were contaminated. "Honey, for this gate at this moment, I am the supervisor. And I'm not sure we want to accommodate people of your type in our premium cabin. It can be disruptive to our real customers." With a flick of her wrist, Brenda pressed a sequence of keys on her terminal. A whirring sound came from the printer beside her. She tore off the slip of paper and smirked. "It seems there's been a seating error," she announced with relish. "Your seat 2A is actually unavailable. Maintenance issue. We've had to downgrade you." She gestured vaguely towards the sprawling, crowded general boarding area. "You'll be in Zone 5 now. Seat 38E. Middle seat back of the plane. You should be more comfortable there. With your people." The final two words were delivered with a quiet, venomous hiss. Having delivered her verdict, Brenda took Imani's phone and, with a flourish of theatrical finality, made a show of deleting the digital boarding pass. She then held the phone out. "Now, if you'll please move out of the line," she said, her smile a triumphant, ugly gash. "You're holding up our actual first-class passengers." For a long moment, Imani didn't move. She stared at Brenda, not with the anger the woman so clearly wanted, but with a chilling, analytical focus. She wasn't seeing a gate agent anymore. She was seeing a liability. A cancer at the heart of her new investment. The triumph she had felt just hours ago had curdled into a cold, hard resolve. The plan had been to observe, to learn to strategize from a distance for the first few weeks. Brenda's hateful performance had just changed everything. The work wasn't going to start in a few weeks. It was going to start right here, right now, in the humiliating chaos of Terminal 4. Imani took her phone back, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't move out of the line. Instead, she took a small step to the side, her eyes never leaving Brenda's smug face. Then she unlocked her phone, navigated past the now empty AuraJet app, and opened her contacts. She scrolled to a name she had added only yesterday, a name she hadn't expected to call for at least a month. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. "Hi, Robert," she said, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying a weight that made the air around her seem to crackle. "It's Imani Jackson. We spoke yesterday about the acquisition. I'm at JFK Terminal 4 Gate B23. I'm afraid we have a problem. A big one." Brenda watched Immani make the phone call with a look of theatrical boredom, but a flicker of something annoyance, perhaps a sliver of uncertainty, danced in her eyes. She rolled them dramatically and turned to the next passenger, a portly man in a golf shirt who had been watching the exchange with undisguised glee. "Sorry about the hold-up, sir," Brenda said, her voice instantly transforming into a syrupy sweet coo. "Just had to take out the trash." The man chuckled. "No problem at all. Some people just don't know their place." The casual cruelty of the exchange, the easy complicity sent a chill down Imani's spine. This wasn't just one rogue employee. This was a culture being actively fostered and validated right here in public. On the other end of the line, Robert Thorne, the outgoing CEO of AuraJet, had gone silent. Immani could picture him in his plush corner office, probably finalizing the handover documents, completely unaware of the drama unfolding at one of his own gates. "Immani, are you all right?" Robert's voice was laced with confusion. "What kind of problem is it about the press release?" "No, Robert," Immani said, turning her back slightly to the line to create a sliver of privacy. Her gaze, however, remained fixed on Brenda's reflection in the terminal window. "The problem is with your gate agent at B23. Her name is Brenda. She has just publicly accused me of credit card fraud, refused to honor my first-class ticket, and reassigned me to a middle seat in the back of the plane, citing my type as a reason for the downgrade." She let the words hang in the air. The silence on the other end of the phone was now profound heavy. She could hear the faint sound of a chair creaking as if Robert Thorne had shot up from his seat. What?" He finally stammered, his voice a disbelieving squeak. "Are you serious? There must be some misunderstanding." "Oh, I assure you, Robert, the only misunderstanding is on her part," Immani replied, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "She seems to be under the impression that her job is secure." Behind her, Brenda had finished with the golfer and was now waving impatiently at the next person. "Let's go, people, this isn't a spectator sport." "Move it along," she barked. She glanced over at Immani, who was still on the phone, and let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "Security," Brenda bellowed, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged terminal. "We have a loiterer refusing to leave the boarding area." This was a calculated escalation. Brenda was doubling down, using the threat of security to intimidate Immani into slinking away in defeat. Two Transportation Security Administration TSA officers, looking bored and weary, began to amble over from their post near the concourse entrance. They moved without urgency, accustomed to the petty power plays of gate agents. Robert Immani said into the phone, her voice urgent but controlled. "Your employee is now calling security on me. You have 60 seconds to handle this before I do, and trust me when I say you will not like the way I handle it." "Stay right there, Immani. Don't move. Don't say anything," Robert pleaded, panic coloring his voice. "I'm calling the station manager. I'll call his cell directly. David Chen. He'll be there in a minute. Just, please, stay put." The line went dead. Immani lowered her phone. The 2 TSA officers had arrived. One was a tall, stoic man with a shaved head. The other was shorter, younger, with a perpetually nervous expression. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" The taller officer asked, his voice a low, monotone rumble. Brenda immediately inserted herself between them. "Yes, officer, thank you for coming," she said, practically vibrating with self-importance. "This individual was denied boarding for causing a disturbance, and now she is refusing to leave the gate area. She's harassing me and my passengers." Immani met the officer's gaze. She didn't speak. She simply stood her ground, her expression unreadable, projecting a sense of calm authority that seemed to momentarily confuse him. He had likely expected tears or shouting or pleading. He was not prepared for quiet defiance. "Is that true, ma'am?" the younger officer asked, looking at Immani. "Did you cause a disturbance?" Before Immani could answer, Brenda cut in again. "She's a troublemaker. Look at her. Probably trying to scam a free flight. We get them all the time." She gestured again at Imani's joggers. "Thinks she can just show up and demand a first-class seat. The entitlement is unbelievable." It was then that Immani noticed him. Standing about 20 feet away, partially obscured by a pillar, was a man. He was in his late 50s with graying temples and a sharp, impeccably tailored suit that stood in stark contrast to the casual travel wear around him. He wasn't looking at his phone or rushing to a gate. He was watching the entire scene unfold with a keen, intelligent interest. He had the unmistakable air of a seasoned business traveler, someone who spent more time in airport lounges than in his own living room. Their eyes met for a brief second, and he gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a fellow player in a game only they understood. Immani had a strange feeling she'd seen him before. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us," the tall TSA officer said, taking a half-step forward. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it was a clear statement. The gears of the system were grinding into motion, and she was about to be caught in them. "That won't be necessary." A new voice cut through the tension. A man in a crisp AuraJet uniform was striding towards them, weaving through the crowd with an urgency that turned heads. He was mid-40s, with a harried but professional demeanor. A small tag on his jacket identified him as David Chen, Station Manager. He arrived slightly out of breath, his eyes immediately scanning the scene. Brenda's smug face, the 2 TSA officers, and Immani, standing calmly in the eye of the storm. "What is going on here?" David demanded, his gaze settling on Brenda. Brenda's victorious smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "David. Thank goodness. I was just handling a situation. This woman." "I know what you were doing, Brenda. I just got off the phone with corporate." David cut her off, his voice sharp. He turned to the TSA officers. "Gentlemen, I apologize. There's been a significant misunderstanding. This situation is under control. We won't be needing your assistance." The tall officer looked from David to Immani and back again. He shrugged. "All right by me. Just doing our job." He and his partner turned and ambled back to their post, the immediate threat of removal dissolving. David Chen then turned his full attention to Immani. His face was a mask of extreme stress and frantic apology. "Ms. Jackson." he said, his voice low and shaky. "On behalf of AuraJet, on behalf of myself, I am so sorry. There are no words to express how deeply I regret this." Brenda's jaw went slack. Her eyes darted from her manager's panicked face to Imani's impassive one. The triumphant smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a pale, dawning horror. Miss Jackson. The name was now being spoken with a reverence that she couldn't comprehend. Who is she?" Brenda stammered, pointing a trembling, coral-nailed finger at Imani. David Chen shot her a look of pure, unadulterated fury, a look that promised a reckoning of biblical proportions. "Brenda," he seethed through clenched teeth. "This is Ms. Imani Jackson, and as of 10 o'clock this morning, she owns this airline." The color drained from Brenda's face. The brassy confidence, the sneering superiority, the petty tyranny, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a woman who looked small and terrified and utterly ruined. The terminal's ambient noise seemed to fade away, replaced by the deafening sound of her world collapsing. Imani watched the realization hit her, the swift and brutal impact of consequence. But she felt no satisfaction, no thrill of victory. Only a profound and weary sadness. The problem was so much bigger than this one woman. She looked past Brenda, past the stunned station manager, to the line of first-class passengers who had been watching the whole drama. They were now staring at her with a new kind of awe and fear. The man in the golf shirt who had joked about taking out the trash looked like he might be sick. Her gaze then found the man by the pillar again. He was no longer trying to be inconspicuous. He was watching her openly now, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He lifted his hand in a small, respectful salute. It was then that Imani finally placed him. He was Arthur Vance, the founder and CEO of Sterling Airlines, AuraJet's biggest and most successful competitor. And he had just witnessed the entire horrifying spectacle. He had just been handed a priceless piece of corporate intelligence. The new owner of AuraJet was a force to be reckoned with, and the company she had just bought was rotten from the inside out. The game had just become infinitely more complicated. The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the pre-thunderstorm humidity. "She owns this airline." The words seemed to echo in the cavernous space, amplified by the stunned silence that had fallen over gate B23. The queue of passengers, once a river of impatient individuals, had become a frozen tableau of gawking faces. Phones which had been discreetly recording the confrontation were now held aloft, more brazenly capturing the fallout. Brenda swayed slightly on her feet, her hand gripping the edge of the counter for support. Her carefully constructed mask of authority had shattered, and the person underneath was fragile and exposed. Her mind raced a frantic, panicked scramble to rewind time, to unsay the words, to undo the sneer. "Your people. Stolen credit cards. Take out the trash." Each remembered phrase was a nail in her own coffin. Owns the airline." She whispered the words barely audible. It was a nonsensical concept, like being told the floor was the sky. The woman in the joggers, the woman she had mentally categorized as insignificant disposable, was the ultimate authority. David Chen ignored her, his entire focus on Imani. He was in full damage control mode, his mind a whirlwind of protocols and crisis management strategies. "Ms. Jackson, please. Allow me to escort you to our first-class lounge. We can get you a drink, some food. We can sort this all out away from all this." He gestured helplessly at the crowd of onlookers. Imani's eyes flickered from Brenda's ashen face to David's desperate one. Then she looked past them to the man she now recognized as Arthur Vance. He was still there by the pillar, a silent observer. He hadn't moved. His presence was a stark reminder that this was no longer a private matter. This was a public event, a case study in corporate failure that would be whispered about in boardrooms across the country by nightfall. Sterling Airlines' PR and marketing teams would likely be drafting campaigns around it, before Flight 722 even pushed back from the gate. "No, Mr. Chen," Imani said, her voice cutting through his frantic apologies. It was quiet, but it carried an undeniable finality. "I will not be going to the lounge. The problem isn't in the lounge. The problem is right here." She turned her attention back to Brenda, who flinched as if struck. "Brenda," Imani said, the name now clinical and detached. "You asked me what a first-class passenger looks like. I think the more important question is, what does an AuraJet employee look like? What do they stand for?" Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. A strangled poem escaped her lips. "They should stand for service," Imani continued, answering her own question. "For respect, for safety. They are the ambassadors of the brand. They are the guardians of our reputation. A reputation you have single-handedly dragged through the mud in the last 10 minutes. David Chen stepped forward. "Ms. Jackson, I assure you Brenda's actions are not representative of our company values. She will be dealt with, severely. Her employment is terminated effective immediately." He turned to Brenda. "Brenda, gather your personal belongings. Security will escort you out." It was a swift, brutal, and predictable move, the sacrificial lamb offered up to appease the new god. But for Imani it wasn't enough. It was too easy. Firing Brenda solved the immediate problem, but it didn't address the sickness that allowed her to flourish. "No," Imani said again, and David's head snapped back towards her, his expression one of pure shock. "No," he repeated, bewildered. "No," Imani affirmed. "You will not be firing her. Not yet." Brenda looked up, a wild, desperate hope flickering in her terrified eyes. Could she be saved? Was this a reprieve? Firing her is a neat and tidy solution. "Mr. Chen," Imani explained, her voice taking on the sharp, analytical tone she used in the boardroom. "It allows AuraJet to issue a press release saying you have a zero-tolerance policy and have taken swift action. It allows you all to pretend she was just one bad apple. But I was standing here. I saw the other passengers. I heard them. This bad apple was rotting in a barrel that encouraged it. She felt comfortable, empowered even to behave this way. Why?" David was speechless. This was moving far beyond a simple customer service complaint. This was a corporate autopsy, and he was the lead pathologist. "So here is what is going to happen," Imani stated, taking control of the scene with an ease that was breathtaking to witness. "Brenda, you will stay right here. You will hand your headset to your colleague." She gestured to the other younger gate agent, who had been watching the entire affair with wide-eyed horror. What's your name?" "Maria," the young woman squeaked. "Maria," Imani said, giving her a brief, reassuring nod. "You will take over the boarding process for Flight 722. You will treat every single passenger from Zone 1 to Zone 5 with the exact same level of courtesy and professionalism. Is that understood?" Yes, ma'am," Maria stammered, scrambling to take the headset from Brenda's limp hand. "Next," Imani continued, turning back to the station manager. "Mr. Chen, I want you to pull the employee files for every single person on duty at this gate for the past 6 months. I want every customer complaint, every commendation, and every performance review. I want them on my tablet before this flight takes off." "Of course, Ms. Jackson, right away." And finally, Imani said, her voice dropping slightly as she addressed Brenda directly again. Brenda, you are going to go to the back of that airplane. You are going to find seat 38E. My new seat. And you are going to sit there for the entire flight to San Francisco. A wave of confusion washed over everyone. Brenda stared at her, uncomprehending. Sit on the plane. Yes, Imani confirmed. You are going to experience the comfort you so generously offered me. You'll be a passenger. You will have no authority. You will not speak to the flight crew except to ask for a water. You will sit there in that middle seat for 5.5 hours. And you will think. You will think about your actions, your words, and the kind of company culture that made you believe they were acceptable. Your final performance review begins now, and it will end when we land. The twist was brilliant in its cruelty and its justice. It wasn't a simple firing. It was an education, a forced immersion in the consequences of her own actions. The ultimate walk of shame at 35,000 feet. Imani then turned and walked back to the counter, picking up the small slip of paper Brenda had printed the boarding pass for seat 38E. She looked at it, then looked back at the stunned woman. Don't worry, Imani said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I'll be taking my original seat, 2A. I'll be right up front. If you need anything, don't hesitate to keep it to yourself. With that, she turned to the jet bridge. But before she walked down, she paused and looked back one last time, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, over David Chen, over the shell-shocked Brenda, and finally landing once more on Arthur Vance. He was no longer smiling. He was watching her with a look of profound, calculated respect. The look one predator gives another, when they realize they are no longer the only one in the jungle. Imani gave him the same subtle nod he had given her earlier. It was a silent acknowledgement. Game on. Then she turned and walked down the jet bridge, leaving a maelstrom of chaos consequence and the beginning of a revolution in her wake. The flight to San Francisco was no longer about getting some rest. It was now a flying laboratory, with its first unwilling test subject trapped in row 38. The interior of the AuraJet Airbus A3221 felt like a different universe from the pandemonium at the gate. The lighting was soft, the air was cool, and a gentle generic jazz track played softly through the cabin speakers. As Imani stepped aboard, the lead flight attendant, a poised woman in her 50s named Catherine, greeted her with a practiced warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Jackson," Catherine said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The message had clearly been relayed from the gate. The name Imani Jackson was now radioactive, and the crew was walking on eggshells. "Thank you, Catherine," Imani replied, her voice neutral. She made her way to seat 2A, a spacious leather seat by the window. As she settled in, she saw David Chen escorting a pale, trembling Brenda down the jet bridge. Brenda wasn't wearing her AuraJet blazer anymore. She was clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. She kept her head down, refusing to make eye contact with the flight crew, who stared at her with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They all knew Brenda. They knew her attitude, her reputation for being difficult, her petty tyrannies. Seeing her stripped of her power and forced to walk the length of the plane was a surreal, almost unbelievable sight. A flight attendant, a young man named Ben, pointed her towards the back. "All the way to the rear, ma'am. Row 38. His voice was professionally flat, but Imani could detect a note of satisfaction in it. Brenda had probably made his life hell on more than one occasion. Imani watched as Brenda completed her long, humiliating walk of shame. Every passenger she passed, many of whom had witnessed the scene at the gate, turned to watch. Their faces held a range of expressions: pity, contempt, and a kind of grim satisfaction. It was a public shaming more profound than any simple termination. Brenda finally disappeared into the crowded economy cabin, a ghost at her own funeral. As the last of the first-class passengers boarded, including to Imani's surprise Arthur Vance, who took seat 3B directly across the aisle from her, Catherine approached Imani's seat. "Ms. Jackson," she said, her voice low and earnest. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff? Champagne, a mimosa." "Just some water for now." "Thank you, Catherine," Imani replied. Catherine nodded but lingered. "I just want you to know," she began, her professional veneer cracking slightly to reveal a genuine concern, "that what happened out there, that is not who we are. Most of us, we take pride in our work. We believe in this airline." Imani looked at her, seeing the years of service in the lines around her eyes, the quiet dedication. This was the other side of the coin. For every Brenda, there was a Catherine, a professional, who had been trying to keep the ship afloat while management ran it into the ground. "I believe you, Catherine," Imani said, and for the first time she offered a genuine small smile. "And I'm counting on it." Relief washed over Catherine's face. She gave a small nod and retreated to the galley. Across the aisle, Arthur Vance was watching her again. He leaned forward slightly. "That was quite a performance," he said, his voice a low baritone. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it." "It wasn't a performance," Imani corrected him, turning to face him. "It was a necessary business decision." "A business decision," Vance mused, a small smile playing on his lips. "You demote a gate agent to a passenger and force her to fly across the country in a middle seat as a business decision. You have a wonderfully direct management style, Ms. Jackson. When a part of the business is toxic, you have to detoxify it," Imani said simply. "Sometimes that requires a more hands-on approach." "Indeed," Vance agreed. He steepled his fingers. "Tell me what made you buy this airline. Wall Street has been writing AuraJet's obituary for months. Everyone assumed Sterling would just pick up the pieces after the bankruptcy." Imani looked out the window as the ground crew began to push the plane back from the gate. "Everyone assumed wrong," she said. "Your competitor, Mr. Vance, is not my primary concern right now. My own house is. A house, as you saw, that is in desperate need of cleaning." Her tablet buzzed. It was an email from David Chen. Attached were the files she had requested. Dozens of them. Performance reviews, complaint logs, commendation records for the entire JFK ground staff. She opened the first file. Brenda Simmons' performance history. As the plane taxied towards the runway, Imani began to read, and what she read made her blood run cold. It was worse than she could have possibly imagined. Brenda wasn't just a bad apple. She was a predator who had been allowed to hunt with impunity for years. The file was a horrifying chronicle of abuse and neglect. There were over 40 formal passenger complaints filed against her in the last 2 years alone. Agent was rude and dismissive. Agent used discriminatory language towards my family. Agent seemed to take pleasure in denying my elderly mother a wheelchair. Agent mocked my accent and threatened to have me arrested when I asked for a supervisor. The complaints came from a diverse cross-section of humanity: students, families, business travelers, tourists. But a disturbing pattern quickly emerged. A disproportionate number of the complaints came from women, people of color, and non-native English speakers. Brenda had a clear and consistent pattern of targeting those she perceived as vulnerable or less than. Worse still were the responses from management. Each complaint was met with the same bland corporate speak reply. "We have investigated the matter and taken appropriate action." But the file showed no evidence of any appropriate action ever being taken. There were no disciplinary notes or mandatory retraining, no suspensions. Just a handful of perfunctory meetings where her direct supervisor, a man named Gary, had clearly just gone through the motions. Gary's notes were telling, "Brenda is a bit rough around the edges, but she gets the job done." Passengers can be overly sensitive. "Brenda assures me the situation was misunderstood." He had protected her, time and time again. Then Imani saw the commendations. There were a few, mostly from passengers, who looked like the man in the golf shirt, praising Brenda for keeping things orderly and not taking any nonsense. But there were also commendations from her supervisors, from Gary, praising her for her efficiency in boarding, for her low rate of compensation payouts for denied boarding. She wasn't just being protected, she was being rewarded. She was the perfect cog in a broken machine, a machine designed to prioritize speed and cost-cutting over human dignity. The plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, banking gracefully over the sprawl of Long Island. As it climbed, Immani felt the full weight of her new responsibility settle upon her. This wasn't just about saving a failing business. It was about dismantling a culture of cruelty that had been allowed to fester for years. She switched from Brenda's file to Gary's, the supervisor. The picture became clearer. His reviews were all about numbers, on-time departures, baggage handling, speed budget adherence. There was no metric for customer satisfaction, no incentive to treat people with respect. The system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. It was a system that created Brenda's. A new email from Robert Thorne. The old CEO popped up. The subject line was Urgent Press Strategy. He had attached a draft statement full of the very corporate jargon she had predicted. It talked about isolated incidents and thorough investigations. Imani deleted the email without reading the attachment. She began to type a reply, not just to Robert, but to the entire executive board, whose email addresses she had already memorized. Her fingers flew across the screen. Subject: our new direction. Effective immediately. All forget the press release. Our response will not be words. It will be action. 1. David Chen is promoted to Interim Director of East Coast Operations. His first task is to personally contact every single one of the 43 passengers who filed a formal complaint against Brenda Simmons in the last 2 years. He will offer them a full, unreserved apology on my behalf and a full refund for their flight, plus a $5,000 travel voucher for future use. 2. Gary, the supervisor who enabled this behavior, is to be placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending a full investigation into his conduct. 3. We are immediately instituting a new non-negotiable metric for all station managers and supervisors, the Customer Dignity Score. It will be based on verified passenger feedback, and it will be directly tied to 50% of their annual bonus. 4. I have compiled a list of 25 other employees across the network with similar complaint patterns to Brenda. They are to be pulled from frontline duty immediately and scheduled for a mandatory 3-day empathy and de-escalation training program. They will not return to customer-facing roles until they pass. This is not a negotiation. This is the new AuraJet. Regards, Imani Jackson, CEO. She hit send. The immediate karma for Brenda was sitting in seat 38E. But the hard karma, the systemic cleansing fire, was just beginning. It was aimed not just at the soldier, but at the generals who had sent her into battle. Across the aisle, Arthur Vance watched her type, a thoughtful, almost wary expression on his face. He had come on this flight expecting to watch a wounded animal bleed out. He was quickly realizing he was trapped in a thicket with a lioness. The 5.5-hour flight to San Francisco was the most productive of Imani Jackson's life. While Brenda stewed in the back of the plane, trapped between a snoring man with a formidable gut and a teenager blasting tinny music through his headphones, Imani waged a war from 35,000 feet. Her seat 2A became the command center for a corporate revolution. Armed with the employee files and a direct line to the company's terrified executive team, she worked with a relentless surgical precision. The email she had sent was just the opening salvo. It was followed by a barrage of directives, each one designed to dismantle the toxic culture that had allowed the incident at Gate B23 to happen. She ordered a complete overhaul of the customer complaint system, transforming it from a black hole where feedback went to die into a transparent, trackable process. A new Chief Experience Officer position was created, reporting directly to her, tasked with one thing: advocating for the passenger. She mandated that every single corporate executive, from the CFO to the head of legal, had to work a full 8-hour shift on the front line as a gate agent, a baggage handler, or a member of the cabin crew once every quarter. "You cannot fix what you do not understand," she wrote in a memo. Across the aisle, Arthur Vance watched in fascination. He had ordered a scotch, and he nursed it slowly, his eyes rarely leaving Immani. He saw her wave away the lunch service, her focus absolute. He saw the flicker of expressions on her face as she read through reports, a frown of disgust, a tight line of anger, a nod of grim determination. He was witnessing a masterclass in crisis leadership. His initial thought that AuraJet's implosion would be a gift to Sterling Airlines was evaporating. This new AuraJet, forged in the fire of public humiliation and remade in the image of its fiercely intelligent new owner, might not be a wounded animal at all. It might just become his most formidable competitor. When the flight began its descent into San Francisco, the lead flight attendant, Catherine, approached Imani's seat again. Her demeanor was different now. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, hopeful energy. "Ms. Jackson," she said, "I've been with this airline for 22 years. I've seen 3 different CEOs. I've never seen anything like this." The flight attendants we're all talking. "We feel like someone has finally turned the lights on." "The lights are just the beginning, Catherine," Immani said, looking up from her tablet. "Now we have to clean the house." As the plane taxied to the gate, Immani gathered her things. She stood up her simple joggers and denim jacket, now looking less like casual wear and more like the uniform of a leader who cared more about substance than style. She waited for the seatbelt sign to turn off. When it did, she did not move to exit the plane. Instead, she turned and began walking towards the back. The economy cabin was a flurry of activity as people grabbed their bags from the overhead bins. But a path seemed to part for Immani as she walked down the aisle. The passengers, many of whom had been on their phones during the flight reading the news that was already breaking about the AuraJet takedown, watched her with awe. She stopped at row 38. Brenda was still in her seat, crushed into the middle spot. She looked exhausted, disheveled, and utterly broken. The 5.5 hours had clearly been an eternity. She had been invisible, a non-person, forced to endure the same cramped, uncomfortable experience she had so gleefully inflicted on others. She looked up at Immani, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of terror and resignation. "The flight is over, Brenda," Immani said, her voice devoid of triumph. "Your review is complete." Brenda finally found her voice a hoarse, desperate whisper. Are you going to fire me now?" Imani was silent for a moment, considering the woman before her. Firing her was the easy answer. It was what everyone expected. But Imani hadn't bought an airline to do what was easy. "No, Brenda, I'm not going to fire you," she said. A flicker of disbelief, of impossible hope, crossed Brenda's face. "Firing you lets you off the hook," Imani continued, her voice so low that only Brenda and those in the immediate vicinity could hear. "It would allow you to become a victim, to tell your friends that you were fired by some woke new boss. It would allow you to avoid learning the lesson, and I am very invested in you learning the lesson." "So what? What's going to happen to me?" Brenda asked, her voice trembling. "You are being reassigned," Imani said. "Effective Monday, you will be working in the baggage claim department at San Francisco International. Specifically, you will be in charge of the lost and damaged luggage counter." The sentence was in its own way more brutal than termination. It was a sentence to frontline purgatory, a daily grinding penance where she would have to face the angriest, most frustrated customers in the entire travel ecosystem. She would have no power, no authority to deny claims or dismiss complaints. Her job would be to listen, to empathize, and to help. She would spend her days looking into the faces of people whose travel plans had been ruined, and she would be forced to see them not as annoyances, but as human beings. "You will work there for 6 months," Imani dictated. "Every week, you will write me a 1-page report on what you have learned about customer empathy. If at the end of those 6 months, I am convinced that you have genuinely understood the meaning of service, we can discuss another role for you at this company. If not, you will be terminated. This is your one and only chance to earn your place at the new AuraJet." Brenda stared at her, speechless. It wasn't mercy. It was a crucible. Imani turned and walked back towards the front of the plane without a backward glance. The hard karma had been delivered. It wasn't a lightning strike of vengeance. It was a long, slow, arduous path to redemption. Redemption with no guarantee of success. It was just. As she reached the exit, Arthur Vance was waiting for her in the aisle. He had let everyone else deplane ahead of him. "Lost and damaged luggage," he said, shaking his head with a wry smile. "That's diabolically brilliant, Ms. Jackson." "It's just Mr. Vance," Imani corrected him. "Perhaps," he conceded. He extended a hand. "Arthur Vance. It seems we're going to be competitors." Imani took his hand. Her grip was firm. "I look forward to it," she said. "But a word of advice, check on your own house. There's a Brenda at every airline. The question is, what are you doing about her?" Arthur Vance's smile faltered for just a second. She had turned his own observation back on him, planting a seed of doubt. He gave a slight nod, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Point taken, Ms. Jackson. Welcome to the West Coast." Imani walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal at SFO, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. The news of what had happened on Flight 722 went viral. It became a legend in the business world, a story of how one woman's humiliation was transformed into a catalyst for revolutionary change. AuraJet under Imani's leadership did not go bankrupt. Within 18 months, it posted its first profitable quarter in 5 years. The customer dignity score became a new industry standard. The airline became known not for being the cheapest, but for being the most respectful. It turned out that treating people like human beings was actually good for business. And Brenda. For 6 months, she worked the lost luggage counter. The first few weeks were hell. She was yelled at, cried at, and cursed at. But slowly, something began to change. She started to see the faces behind the anger. The father who had lost a bag with his child's medication. The bride whose wedding dress was missing. She started to listen. Her weekly reports to Immani, at first stiff and resentful, gradually became more insightful, more human. At the end of her 6-month penance, she was quietly reassigned to a role in crew scheduling far from the public eye. She was a changed woman, humbled, quieter, and infinitely more aware. The hard karma hadn't just punished her, it had remade her. And in doing so, it had helped remake an entire airline. Imani Jackson hadn't just bought a company, she had given it back its soul. This wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about justice. The kind of deep structural justice that doesn't just punish one person, but transforms the system that created them. Imani Jackson showed that true power isn't about humiliating those below you, but about lifting an entire organization up. What Brenda faced wasn't just a bad day. It was a long, hard look in the mirror, a consequence designed not just to break her spirit, but to rebuild it. What do you think? Was this the perfect karma? What would you have done in Imani's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in stories where the underdog comes out on top and true justice is served, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama, where karma always has the final word.